Wel, prynawn da, unwaith eto I chi gyd. Yesterday was Remembrance Sunday, a time of year when we come together to pay tribute to all those who have served their country, a time when we remember all of those who gave their lives in so many conflicts. For more than 100 years now, there have been poignant ceremonies at war memorials in every town and village throughout Wales. But this year, we had to pay our tributes in different ways because of the pandemic. Instead of marches and parades, many did so quietly on our doorsteps or at home with family. Now, I was privileged to take part in the National Service of Remembrance in Cardiff and laid a wreath on behalf of everyone in Wales. My thoughts were not only with all those service people we have lost. I was thinking as well of all those families in Wales who have suffered a death from coronavirus this year. This weekend, we passed yet another grim milestone as Public Health Wales recorded its 2000th death. This is a truly terrible virus. It hits us hardest where we are most vulnerable, in our love for family and friends. People are being taken before their time. Families are losing parents, children, brothers and sisters. The cruelty of coronavirus is lived out in the pain and suffering of all those families. And yesterday, the thoughts of so many people here in Wales were with you all. Today, the firebreak period we have been through together over the last 17 days is over. But coronavirus, of course, is still very much with us. Across our border, England has just started a month-long lockdown to bring the virus under control. Similar measures are being introduced in many European countries as winter begins in earnest. Over the weekend, new quarantine rules have been introduced for people coming into Wales and the United Kingdom from Denmark, and a strict travel ban is in place following the discovery of a new mutated strain of coronavirus in mink. This continues to be a virus full of unpleasant surprises. Today I want to say thank you to everyone for their support and their hard work over the 17 days of the firebreak period. None of us wanted to see a firebreak, and it hasn't been an easy period for anyone. But it has given us an opportunity to work on a number of other important areas. Now children are back in school. The Education Minister will tomorrow make an announcement about qualification arrangements for summer 2021. We have taken the last 7 days to further strengthen our test, trace, protect system by creating a new central team to support the local contract tracing teams and opening our 3 all-day, everyday Welsh laboratories. And we brought forward the opening of field hospital capacity where it is needed. Ysbyty Seren is open and being expanded in Cwm Taf Morgannwg. Ysbyty Selwyn is about to open in Carmarthenshire. The Deeside Field Hospital will start taking patients in North Wales from today, and the Grange University Hospital will open on the 17th of November. All of these things strengthening our efforts to deal with the impact of coronavirus here in Wales as we go further into the winter. Now, we won't know the full impact of our firebreak period for a few weeks yet, but there are some tentative, early positive signs, and those give us some hope. Mobility data shows large increases in the number of people staying at home during the firebreak, back to the levels last seen at the start of May. And of course, it is absolutely vital that working from home as much as possible continues beyond today. And we are starting to see some signs that cases of coronavirus are beginning to fall from the very high levels we have seen over the last few weeks. The all Wales level has fallen back from 250 cases per 100,000 people to just under 220 cases. In Merthyr Tydfil, where we saw rates as high as 700 cases per 100,000 in the population, we're now seeing rates down to around 520. Still far too high, of course, but an important and encouraging fall. The number of people being admitted to hospital continues to rise, as we would have expected. There are more than 1,400 coronavirus-related cases in hospital in Wales today, and that's higher than back in April of this year. And as I said at the start, sadly, we are still seeing high numbers of deaths being reported to Public Health Wales every day. That's why it is so important that we get coronavirus under control to make sure that we do not see that continuing. Now, from today, a new set of national measures replace the firebreak restrictions and the previous combination of local and national restrictions. Our exit from the firebreak needs to be careful and cautious so that we can maximise its impact. The national measures will be reviewed in a fortnight to see whether there is any new evidence we can use to help us to plot the future. But if we are going to alter the course of this virus, it will not be the rules and regulations alone which make the difference. Our success or failure lies in the hands of every one of us and how we act from now on. We cannot go back to how things were earlier in the autumn. We all need to make changes to our lives and adapt to this virus so that we reduce the risk of catching it ourselves or passing it on to others. Coronavirus is highly infectious. It thrives on contact between people. To keep each other safe, we need to reduce the number of people with whom we are in contact and the amount of time we spend with them. We all need to think about our own lives and how we keep our families safe. We need to stop thinking about the maximum limit of the rules and regulations, and instead, each one of us needs to ask ourselves, what can I do? What can I do in the way I behave to keep myself and others safe? We all need to minimise the number of people we meet, to make sure we travel only when it is essential, to work from home as much as possible, and to do those simple things which make a difference. Yesterday, as I said, was Remembrance Sunday. Let us now remember, as we go into this post-firebreak period, that the only way to turn back coronavirus is by every one of us playing our part. It's in that way alone that together we will keep Wales safe. Diolch yn fawr wrth cwrs I chi gyd. Now turn to take some questions from our journalist colleagues, and as usual, all the answers will be broadcast live on our social media accounts. And this afternoon, first of all, to Adrian Masters at ITV Wales.
Thank you, First Minister. I wonder if I could ask you about the idea of city-wide testing. As you know, Liverpool is already carrying out a pilot. Another 2 English cities are expected to be announced today. Will it happen in Wales, and if so, when?
Well, Adrian, our officials are involved in the Liverpool pilot in the sense that we are part of the network that will learn from the way in which that experiment is being conducted. the things that are working, the things that are more challenging than expected. And the idea of whole town testing is, of course, attractive to us. And we will look to see whether, as we learn from experiments elsewhere, there are ways in which we could deploy similar sorts of approaches here in Wales. I don't have a date by which that will be possible. There is still a lot of learning to be gathered from these early days of the Liverpool experiment, but we are plugged into that. And we will look to see ways in which we can learn from that experience and put it to work in Wales.
Thank you. Can you say if there's been any progress on talks with the other governments of the UK on a UK-wide approach to Christmas? If not, can you say what you might be planning for Wales?
My office has been contacted today by the office of Michael Gove, the Minister in charge of the Cabinet Office, to get a date in the diary this week. And the topic of that meeting will be a common approach to Christmas. The same message suggests that the UK government now intend to have a weekly engagement with us all, and I very much welcome that. Hope that it will happen. It will give us that regular, reliable rhythm of engagement that we've talked about so often here. And I think it is good news that the first topic of discussion will be a common plan for Christmas, because I very firmly believe that this is one of those areas where having an approach that is adopted across the United Kingdom is the right way to be able to offer hope to people here in Wales and elsewhere that we are able to plan purposefully together for the season. Adrian, thank you. Over to Dan Davis at BBC Wales.
Diolch, Prif Weinidog, and if you could answer these in Welsh as well, I'd be very grateful. The Health Minister has, when he was asked about local lockdowns returning in the future, said it couldn't be ruled out the government would take action when appropriate. Can you be more specific? What action and when would it be appropriate?
Well, Dan, I don't think we've ever ruled out the possibility that we might need to take targeted local action in the future. I've given the example, I think, from this podium a couple of times, how right at the beginning, as we began to come out of lockdown, we faced an outbreak in a factory on Ynys Môn, and we took targeted action there to deal with that very local event. So that's what we have been discussing here in the Welsh Government. A repertoire which we set out in our winter protection plan. It's all there, a menu of actions that could be taken at a local level were that to be necessary. And we haven't in any way stepped back from that. We will have our national set of rules that come in today, and they will be in place everywhere in Wales. If there are local flare-ups of the sort that I've just described, then we will draw on that repertoire, work with local players, local authority leaders, the local public health teams and so on, and then calibrate the local action to the nature of the problem that is being faced. So, dydyn ni ddim wedi dweud o gwbl, dydyn ni ddim yn fodlon I wneud pethau ar lefel lleol. Heddi ni'n cyhoeddi set o reoliadau genedlaethol, a bydd hwnna ar gael ledled Cymru. Ond, ni wedi wynebu'n barod sefyllfa ar Ynys Môn enghraifft, ble mewn ffactori o'r nifer o bobl yn cwmpo'n dost o coronavirus, ac oedd pethau lleol allwn ni wneud, ac os ni'n wynebu rhywbeth fel yna yn y dyfodol, mae y restr o bethau, mae'n yn y cynllun ni wedi cyhoeddi'n barod am y gaia, sy'n setio mas nifer o pethau allwn ni wneud. Ond beth ni'n mynd I wneud hynny mewn partneriaeth gyda'r bobl lleol, arweinwyr a dododau lleol, pobl sy'n gweithio yn y maes iechyd y cyhoedd lleol hefyd, a defnyddio'r pethau ni'n gallu wneud sy'n addas i'r natur y problem maen nhw'n wynebu yn lleol.
On test and trace, as the number of, or as the workload goes up, so too does the length of time it takes to contact people. And in the most recent week, only 38% of positive cases were reached within 24 hours. Is the government doing enough to properly resource its systems and get them up to speed?
Well, Dan, I hope that we will be able to make an announcement, hopefully by the end of this week, about further investment in our TTP system, particularly to give confidence to people who are employed in it that their employment will continue into the next financial year, as we anticipate now that we will need a TTP system beyond the end of March. We've used the 17 days to enhance our plans to recruit more people into the system, and we've been switching some people within the system as well. As some of you will know, we have teams of people who contact the index case, the person who has had the positive test, and then teams of people who contact the people that they've been in contact with. And we've been just making sure we've got the right balance of people between those two teams, because you're right. Not only is it important to contact the volume of people, and that number has been going up very rapidly, but you've got to do it as quickly as possible. And we've used the 17 days of firebreak to focus on some of those issues. And as I said, there'll be announcements, I hope, later this week about further investment to make sure that we can deal with the increased number of contacts we're asking our teams to be in touch with, and to make sure that they have certainty of employment beyond the current financial year. Dan, thank you. Over to Adam Hale at PA.
Yeah, you said the new national measures would be reviewed in 2 weeks' time, but you, of course, faced calls from opposition parties as well as from others that restrictions should be extended in places like Merthyr Tydfil, which, of course, has very high rates. Will you review whether additional local restrictions are needed there and perhaps other places in the South Wales valleys before this 2-week target?
Well, Adam, we faced calls from opposition parties here when we announced the firebreak, not to have a firebreak period at all. And in fact, the Conservative Party has failed to vote for the regulations that have introduced those regulations repeatedly on the floor of the Cynhadledd. So it is a bit rich to hear them now saying that further restrictions are needed when they've actively opposed the actions that we have taken here. As I said in my answer to Adrian Masters, we've never said that we wouldn't consider further local action where that is necessary. But you saw the figures that I gave earlier of the reduction in the incidence rate per 100,000 of people in Merthyr Tydfil. Always important to give a bit of a health check with Merthyr figures, because it's the smallest local authority in Wales, and relatively small raw numbers drive large percentage and incidence changes. So the current figures, in a very initial way, are showing some promise, provided people in Merthyr, as in the rest of Wales, do the things that we are asking people to do as we come out of the firebreak period. We can have some optimism that the path that we are following in that part of Wales is showing the advantages of the firebreak period that we have just completed.
Thank you. I've spoken to hospitality business owners today who expressed concern that not enough was done by authorities to enforce regulations in city centres like Cardiff when Wales left the first lockdown. Now that helped lead to cases rising in the subsequent second lockdown. Are you instructing councils, for example, to adopt a firmer approach this time in cracking down on people or businesses not keeping to the rules, other than, of course, the things we've already heard, such as the requirement for drinkers to their home addresses?
Well, Adam, we have strengthened the powers available to local authorities since earlier in the year. They now have a more extensive repertoire of things that they can draw on, and they too have strengthened their enforcement teams. The industry itself has a very important responsibility and discharges it very well in many, many instances. So it's a combination of at least three things. It is the actions that the hospitality industry itself takes. It is the actions of enforcement authorities, and most of all, it is the actions of individual citizens asking themselves whether what they are doing is putting themselves and others at risk or helping in the national effort. If people ask themselves that question and do what they should do, not what they think the rules say they can do, then there'll be much less need for enforcement action to be taken at all. Adam, diolch. Over to Will Hayward at Wales Online.
Thank you, First Minister. At the moment, the rules allow people to form a household bubble with one other household who's allowed to stay at their home overnight. However, the rules ban people from going on holiday to stay in a caravan, a hotel, or a self-catered accommodation with that same person. This means that a couple that live apart from each other can stay in each other's homes as much as they want, but they can't go for a romantic break. By the same token, if people's grandparents live on their own and they're bubbled up with them, the grandparent could stay with them as much as they like, but not go on holiday with them to Tenby. Can you just explain to people in Wales exactly what the rationale behind that rule is, please?
Well, the rationale, Will, is that we are coming out of the fire break period in this careful and cautious way. We have restored a number of important freedoms to people. We'll review those regulations at 2 weeks and see if the position in relation to coronavirus allows us to go further. But your question is slightly the sort of question which I hope we won't be hearing people looking to see how further we can press the rules, what more we could be doing. The fewer people you meet, the fewer journeys you make, the more you are doing to protect yourself and others. If we are in a better position than we are today, we will look to do more. But for today, the message to people is not to be asking, why can't I do this and why can't I do that? The request to people in Wales is to ask yourself, do I have to do that? And if you don't have to do it, it's much better that you don't do it. And that will help us all to be able to get the most we can out of the efforts that everybody has made in the last 17 days.
Thank you. I don't think it's so much a case of people asking to do more. It's with this example, it's just asking to be able to do the same thing in another place. It just seems strange that someone could stay over in my house but not stay with me in a hotel, for instance. Just moving on to Cardiff city centre, which is very, very busy today after the fire break was lifted. There's very long queues and there's crowded streets. Are you worried about this? And what is your message to those people?
Well, I'm not worried about it if it's being well managed and people are behaving in the right way. And I've seen some of those reports, and the reports that I've had are that it's being well managed, that these are retail outlets that have made a big effort to make sure that queues are managed, that people coming in and out of shops are properly controlled, and that people themselves are doing all the things that they can do in observing social distance and being respectful of other people. So our Chief Medical Officer often says that it's what people do when they get somewhere rather than the fact that they are going shopping by itself. That is not necessarily a difficulty. It's how people behave when they make those choices. And provided people are behaving in a way that does not put themselves and others at risk, then I think the fact that people want to do some things today that they've not been able to do for over 2 weeks wouldn't be that surprising to anyone. Well, thank you to Dan Bevan of LBC.
Thank you, First Minister. Good afternoon. I wonder if I get your reaction to some news that broke just before the press conference started. So I understand if you're not entirely briefed on it, but the gist is that Pfizer, the drug company, appear to be leading the race for a COVID-19 vaccine. They say that trials suggest that it's 90% effective. I wonder if I get your reaction to that.
Well, it is good news, of course, if any of the vaccines in trial are making progress. I think you'd always want to read carefully what a particular competitor in this field says on their own behalf. And I'm not going to be tempted today, Dan, as I've tried not to be tempted throughout coronavirus, to suggest that this somehow means that there is a magic bullet on the horizon and coronavirus is about to disappear out of our lives. We will want to see the nature of any vaccine, how much protection it offers people, for how long. But of course, any vaccine that is emerging strongly from trials is to be welcomed because it will offer some new possibilities in the future.
Thank you very much. And Sir Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party, of course, during his call-in with Nick Ferrari on LBC this morning, accused the Prime Minister of being too cavalier with his approach to easing the first lockdown. Considering that coming out of this lockdown, we've gone from a full lockdown to some of the least strict measures we've had throughout this pandemic. First Minister, are you being too cavalier with easing this lockdown?
Well, Dan, I said in my opening statement that we need to come out of this firebreak as we did from the original lockdown. And here in Wales, as you know, we always took a more careful and cautious approach than across the border. I spent many times at this podium answering questions, asking why we weren't doing things quicker, why we were not, for example, urging people to get back into work. And I want the same approach now. I've spent a whole week urging people in Wales to think very carefully about how they behave as we emerge from the firebreak. It is true that some restrictions are less severe today than they were over the last few weeks, and it is important to recognise the enormous efforts that people have made in that way. But the fact that you can travel is not an invitation to travel, and it's certainly not an instruction to travel. The question anybody should ask themselves, both in the way that they meet other people and in decisions that people will make to use those new freedoms, is, am I doing what I should? Am I doing the things that make my biggest contribution to the safety of myself and others? And if people do it in that way, the very opposite of a cavalier way, then we will, all of us, get the maximum benefit out of the very difficult last 17 days in which we've all had to live with these very stringent restrictions on our lives. Dan, thank you to Andrew Forgrave at the Daily Post.
Good afternoon, First Minister. If people fail to heed your call for caution to behave sensibly, are we likely to see a second fire break before the end of the year, or is this something you can categorically rule out?
The word categorically worries me in that question, Andrew, because in a coronavirus world, it's very hard to be categoric about almost anything. What we have said is that through the efforts that we have made, and provided people do the right thing now, we have a path through to Christmas. Beyond Christmas and into the new year, many things will happen that we can't foresee today. Some things may be more difficult then. We've spent the weekend, as I said in my opening remarks, dealing with an outbreak in Denmark, where a new strain of coronavirus has emerged that can be very challenging. So more difficulties may happen, more possibilities will happen as well. We've just heard about the announcement from Pfizer today. I know UK ministers have been talking today, as I did last week, about new lateral flow tests, these tests that people can take themselves and get an answer very quickly as to whether or not they are suffering from coronavirus or not. So I just think it isn't helpful to anybody for me simply to speculate about where we will be as we move into a new calendar year. What we are planning is for the coming weeks, making sure that the efforts we have made give us a path through for the rest of this year and into the Christmas period.
Thank you, First Minister. Something a little bit different. Some people have been asking about Christmas cards and whether it's safe to send them this year or to deliver them in person. Do you feel it is safe, and do you anticipate any delay to deliveries due to distancing and self-isolation requirements and sorting officers?
As far as I know, Andrew, there's no reason why people should not be sending themselves other people Christmas cards. People have continued to mark other occasions, birthdays and so on, by sending cards in the whole of this year. I think our colleagues in the Royal Mail have done a fantastic job. We talk about frontline workers a lot, don't we? And there are many frontline workers. Of course, all workers in health and social care, but those people who have kept our mail services going right throughout the pandemic. I think myself, I probably will deliver fewer cards by hand this year because the more we get about and the more we risk meeting people, the more the risks are. I'll be relying on the hugely professional services of those who work in the Royal Mail, and as ever, we'll be thanking them for the enormous efforts they make to make sure that our Christmas post gets from us to those who, this year more than ever, I think we want to be in touch with. Andrew, thank you to Rob Taylor at wrexham.com.
Good afternoon, First Minister. On Friday, the North Wales Health Board said a second outbreak had been declared affecting a small number of patients at Wrexham's hospital. What's the latest on that? And is there a specific concern as this is the second such outbreak there?
Rob, you're right. There is a second but small outbreak at Wrexham Myler, and the latest information I had this morning was that local officials feel that they have it under control. As I've said before, the more coronavirus there is in the community, the greater the risks are inevitably that somehow the virus will make its way into a hospital. And there's been a lot more coronavirus in the Wrexham area than there was earlier in the year when we had that first outbreak. It's why all the efforts that people have made in the firebreak are so important to reduce the flow of coronavirus in the community. Not only does that protect our NHS by stemming the flow of people needing admission to hospital for coronavirus, but it reduces the risk that coronavirus itself will find its way into the NHS.
Thank you. And following on from the Pfizer news and focusing on the process rather than success rates, it appears the UK have ordered 30 million doses of it back in July, with reports there could be 10 million supplied by the end of the year. Are there already agreements on how that could be split? And if so, what would be the Welsh share? And can you give an overview of how vaccine distribution would take place? Yeah,
thank you, Rob. All important questions. So you're right. What has been agreed between the four nations is that the UK government will lead on procurement of any vaccines. I think they have placed orders for up to 6 potential vaccines that are in development. And as they either succeed or fail, then they will secure those supplies on behalf of the United Kingdom. I believe they're likely to be shared across the United Kingdom on a population basis. So the way the Barney formula works, we will get our population share. The distribution, the storage and the distribution of the virus is a matter for the Welsh Government to be in charge of, and I know that a great deal of thought has gone on from very early in the summer. Our Chief Medical Officer put together a group of people months ago to make a plan for how we would deal with our responsibilities were a vaccine to materialise and be available here in Wales. And those plans will be stepped up as the realistic prospect of an actual vaccine strengthens. Thank you, Rob. To Alan Evans at Llanelli Online.
First Minister, the new measures include established health and hygiene measures. We should all follow. The continued limitations on freedom, however, are likely to have a continued impact on families and businesses. How much weight is being applied to looking at strategies which would allow for more freedom in order to balance the impact on business and families, given that we have these universal health and hygiene measures we assume are working very well?
Well, Alan, thank you for drawing attention to the basics, which I didn't have a chance to mention in my opening remarks, but it is those basic things, those social distancing, the hand hygiene, the respect for which we show other people, the wearing of masks in crowded places and so on. Those are the basic things that every one of us can do. It's a constant balancing act between the measures we need to take, which are sufficient to drive down the virus, and still wanting businesses to be able to operate, families to be able to see one another. We've struck a new bargain today with the new freedoms that people have to form household bubbles and to travel. That will only work if it is matched by an ongoing commitment to all those other things that you have mentioned. And the purpose of the 2-week review is to see just how that bargain is going. If it is going well, then the chances may be there to do more to restore further freedom so that business can continue to operate and operate more successfully, and families can see each other in more circumstances. But it's crucially dependent on the other side of that bargain and all those simple everyday things that we can all do which make those measures effective.
And I know we talked a long time ago about the localised approach to COVID-19. With the onset of winter and a potential rise in COVID-19, what does the critical number of cases of COVID-19 within the local authority area have to be before the authority is placed back into lockdown?
I think one of the things we've learnt this autumn is that the numerics, and as you know, we use 50 per 100,000 earlier in the year, that needs to be one of the things that we look at, but it can't be the only thing that we look at, because sometimes that number is driven by a very particular source. An outbreak in a particular workplace, an outbreak involving students coming back to a university and so on. So I think in the future what we will be looking at is a combination of some of those important indicators combined with local intelligence about what is causing those numbers to move up or down. And then if we are to take local action, we will want to try to align the action more closely with the cause of the numbers rising in the first place. I still think the simplest one to grasp is the idea of a factory outbreak, where you need then to concentrate the actions you're taking on that population, on the way the factory itself is operating, contacting tracing the contacts of the people who work in the factory. That will be a different approach than if an outbreak was to be a different order or nature. Thank you. Nathan Shoesmith at the speaker, please.
Thank you, First Minister. Good afternoon. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has called for an end to the 10 p.m. pub and restaurant curfew when the lockdown ends in England next month, saying that it doesn't work. Have you still got confidence that it's working in Wales and not causing potentially more harm than good?
Well, it's very important to remember that it's not the same here in Wales. We've done two things that distinguish our approach from that in England. First of all, we ban the sale of alcohol, not just in pubs at 10 o'clock, but in supermarkets and in off-licences. And we don't require everybody to be out on the pavement at 10 o'clock either. We allow a period of time after 10 o'clock for people to stop, complete their meal if they're eating in a restaurant, or to drink up and then leave in an orderly way. I think some of the difficulties they've had in England have been because they've had that different approach. But we decided on 10 o'clock because we wanted to have a common pattern in border areas. We didn't want to have a perverse incentive for people to pile across the border from England, where pubs were shutting at 10 o'clock because there was more time to drink here in Wales. And it remains one of those areas that if further thought were to be given to it in England, then we would want to be part of those conversations to see whether we would want to align our approach here in Wales.
Thank you. And on another topic, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps over in England has been speaking at the Airport Operators Association annual conference this morning, and said that there has been good progress, very good progress on developing a testing system that could cut the 14-day isolation period from the report down to 7 days. Has the Welsh Government been part of discussions on that, and would you support such a move if possible?
Well, our Chief Medical Officer has been part of conversations with Chief Medical Officers in other parts of the United Kingdom about how long a self-isolation period needs to be put in place for it to be effective. Again, I'm allergic to the sort of announcements you hear out of the UK government that suggests that somehow we're on the verge of another big breakthrough. We can halve the time that we ask people to self-isolate. I think the science is now telling us that you are at your most infectious in the earliest periods of when you begin to suffer from coronavirus, and that it may be possible to reduce some of the self-isolation period without causing major impacts on public health. But that needs to be a decision that is clinically driven, where we get the right medical advice to have those periods, rather than politicians trying to gain a headline. Nathan, thank you. Over to, finally today, to Josh Searle at the South Wales Argus.
Afternoon, First Minister. You touched on it briefly in your opening, but how big an impact will the opening of the Grange Hospital and other such facilities across Wales have on the battle with coronavirus?
Josh, thank you very much. Well, it's a big day for us on the 17th of November when the Grange Hospital opens early, on budget as well. It'll give nearly 700 beds to South East Wales as part of the coronavirus effort. Altogether, we have planned for 5,000 extra beds in the Welsh NHS over this winter. 2,600 of those will come from the 10 field hospitals that we will open, and the other half then will come from expanding capacity within the existing Welsh NHS estate. By far the biggest contribution to that will come with the opening of the Grange University Hospital, and looking forward very much to seeing what will be a state-of-the-art hospital, allowing our clinicians to make the maximum use of their skills to see that up and providing services to people in the South Wales Argus area.
Thank you very much. And we've spoken to business owners in border towns such as Chepstow, who are concerned about how the lockdown in England will impact on their businesses. Is this something the Welsh Government will be keeping a close eye on over the next few weeks? And is there a possibility of extra support for those businesses?
We certainly are looking at those border issues. My colleague Ken Skates, as the Economy Minister, has already said that in his Economic Resilience Fund he will have some flexibility to respond to businesses along the border who are dependent upon trade with people from England and who may suffer as a result of the English lockdown period. Obviously, it's something we have to just keep under review because we don't know exactly what that impact will be. But my colleague, who himself represents a border constituency in North Wales, is very alert to this issue, and as I said, has already indicated that he's prepared to introduce some flexibility into the Economic Resilience Fund to respond to such problems should they materialise. Josh, thank you. Thank you all very much indeed.